All right, folks. So we're going to be kind of quick and dirty today. I'm probably not going to do a whole lot of the fill-ins, just kind of straightforward with the notes. The plan is today to finish 5.7 and a little bit into 5.8, and then on Tuesday, you will have a little bit more to do. So let's dive into this. Okay, so we left off kind of talking about how different countries were responding to the Industrial Revolution, either in an attempt to encourage it or confine it. But with the Industrial Revolution, you wind up with some of these multinational companies. And one of the great examples of this is with Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes is the guy who founds De Beers Diamonds. And his big investment, just like many of the other they all kind of, you never notice there's like this pattern of kind of the robber baron or the railroad baron, of somebody who builds the infrastructure and then is able to control a market because of it. And Cecil Rhodes is a great example of that. So he's the founder of De Beers Diamonds. He invested in a railroad project that started in Cape Town, in modern day South Africa, to Cairo, Egypt. And you can kind of see in the map over here that the British had kind of controlled a lot of that area. There was kind of a section that Germany had control over at a point. And that's why the project never really completely gained control. The idea behind this railroad was that it would connect all of the British controlled colonies, and then his diamond company can get, it's a lot easier to ship something through the Mediterranean to England than it is around the coast of Africa. I'm trying to think, kind of some of the same things, different ideas. The nations of Africa, there are a couple of YouTube clips here. I'm not going to play them, but in your key, you would have the links, and you can pull them open. One of the things we're going to do when I get back is we're going to do a simulation with Dai where you all are going to be put into small groups and you're going to colonize, and kind of represent the different European nations that colonize Africa. But there is going to be some example of a group to represent the Zulu resisting this. And it's usually a day students kind of enjoy. Okay, so what is the Industrial Revolution change about culture? It creates this kind of culture of mass consumerism, and there's also, because people are working in factories instead of farms, when you do have time off, it really is time off. If any of you have family or friends that have farms, there really is no time off. And you talk to family or friends that have cattle or, raise pigs or have crops. If you ever want to try and leave town, you have to get somebody to stay on the farm and continue to care for it for you. So there's really no day off with farming. But with factory work, on a day off, there truly is a day off. And so you have leisure time. So this working in middle class kind of winds up this idea of Sundays off, and consumption needed to keep up with production. So there's a lot of advertisements that happen with this, and you wind up with a lot of leisure activities that would use some of these things like bicycles and boating, and this all but kind of becomes popular around the 1800s. This is really the start of baseball becoming America's pastime. The idea of spending a Sunday afternoon going to a ball game, or if you're in England, a football game. So there's a growing demand for public kind of cultural things. Do you remember when we did that urban game and you're drawing? All of a sudden we talked about having a museum and having the arts and different. There's all of a sudden you've got downtime, and when people have downtime, they want entertainment. So you also see this push for public parks. Now, with all of the smog and everything else, and you live in unhealthy areas, seeing green, seeing things growing is also going to be pushed for. So 5.8 talks about reactions to this. So what conditions lead to calls for change in industrial societies? And then what are those efforts that go into making those things happen? So in class, we've talked about the harsh working conditions, this industrial life kind of provoking resistance, calls for reform. There's trade unions, that's going to be a big thing, that advocate for safer working conditions and higher pay. And then there's a lot of various ideological changes and political movements that are going to come out of this. Some of them are going to promote kind of differing looks at how society should be. So before the Industrial Revolution, your position in society is determined at your birth. And there's really no social mobility. Either you're nobility or you're not. And that's it. The Industrial Revolution changes that. Now, you have this middle class who has money, who has influence, but not a title. And as kings and other rulers need cash, and the nobility blocks them from getting the votes, they start befriending that middle class, which offers that middle class more influence and more political clout. So the Industrial Revolution not only changes what we buy, but it changes how we live and how we interact with each other. So landowning aristocrats on an individual basis don't suffer a whole lot from the Industrial Revolution. They still have their titles, they still have their land. But as a class, they decline in power and influence. Being wealthy, having silver and gold and cash flow becomes more important than owning all those lands. And because land ownership is no longer the basis of wealth, land can at times become a bit of an encumbrance when you look at things like property taxes. So the group that benefits the most from the Industrial Revolution is the middle class. They grow in size, they grow in power, they grow in wealth. All of this is going to increase. And if you are lucky enough, or you get in at the right time and you make the right investment, you can become that upper middle class. Upper middle class, think like white collar jobs. Jobs where you wear a suit every day. You're the banking executive. You're the factory owner. You're the mine owner. You don't get dirty, okay? Your wife doesn't work. Your children go to nice schools. You live in a very nice home. Okay, that's upper middle class. Today, we think doctors, lawyers as upper middle class. Middle class, that's a lot of what we consider most of you. These are smaller businessmen. At the time, these were doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, journalists. These were people who worked jobs that may not make them very rich. You're not living in the $1 million home, but you're not working in the mine either. You work at a job that you make enough money that your family can live modestly, comfortably. You may not have, the yacht and the country home out in the woods or whatever, but you have a nice home in an urban or suburban area. You're not worried about paying the bills every month. The money's going to be there. And then you have the lower levels of the middle class. These people aren't living in a single income household. This may be that somebody has worked up to a management level, but they're not an owner, and they're not necessarily very well educated, but they're not toiling on the factory floor, or they're not the guy who's digging in the coal mine. He may be the manager. But still, even the middle class itself experiences changes during the Industrial Revolution. And because of that growing middle class, they really start to influence, because just the size of populations, how society values things like politics and healthcare. All of this stuff gets affected by this group. So politically, this group is going to value a constitutional government. They really value the concept of private property and free trade and social reforms. Major social reforms are going to be made in the areas of education and prisoner reform and sanitation, because these people have money, but they still live in the city. They are going to value hard work. We talk about that Protestant work ethic, being thrifty, cleanliness, having a very strict morality. They are going to be, sometimes you hear the phrase uppity, people who live beyond their means or think they're classy. It's a lot about respectability, this idea of social status and virtuous behavior going together. And we see still a lot of that today. They believe in education. They believe in hard work being the keys to getting ahead. that you as an individual are responsible for your destiny, and that the poor are poor because of their own misconduct. And this is kind of the start of that, I guess, inaccurate portrayal that people are poor because they don't work hard. Statistically speaking, you are going to stay at whatever social position you were born in. That's why people celebrate those who, people like Bill Gates, who come from, moderate means and then become incredibly wealthy, because it means that we might too. But that's like a one in, I don't know how many billion chance that that will happen. Most people are spending their entire lives in whatever social status they were born in. So, one of the things that changes with the middle class is the lifestyle. Men and women have different roles. The idea of the man's at work and the woman's at home, and that she should be a homemaker, a mother, a wife, this emotional haven at home. You hear that 1950s housewife where she spends all day cooking and cleaning, and then she gets dressed up and puts lipstick on before her husband comes home and has his drink ready. Yeah, not happening in my household. I know that much. But the idea is she is the moral center of the family. She is the manager of consumption. She teaches respectability. She is this glamorous, keeps everything together kind of woman. Is kind of how this gets started, is with the Industrial Revolution. You know what? Let's stop there for today. If you have not been working on that reading guide, that yellow packet, I need you to finish that, because that's going to sneak up on you. The other thing you might want to do is work on a couple ed puzzles, and we will continue next time.